You need to let go, Dad. Ethan's voice cut through the peaceful hum of the workshop, sharp and cold like a brand new chisel. It felt so out of place here, in this sanctuary I'd built over 45 years. I didn't turn around immediately. Instead, I let my hand linger on the piece I was finishing, a rocking horse, carved from a single block of American cherry wood. The grain flowed like water under my fingertips, and the air was thick with the sweet, clean scent of sawdust and cedar. For a moment I just focused on that, on the honest smell of hard work. Then, with a sigh that felt like it came from the very foundation of the building, I slowly turned to face my son. He was standing there, framed by the open bay door, with the late afternoon Carolina sun at his back. He looked like a magazine ad, dressed in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than the new bandsaw I'd been eyeing. The scent of his expensive cologne fought a losing battle with the smell of the woodshop, an unwelcome invader in my world. At 68, I know I look my age. My hands are a roadmap of scars and calluses. My hair is more salt than pepper, and there's a permanent layer of fine sawdust settled into the lines on my face. Looking at him, so polished and perfect, I felt a familiar pang of disappointment. We shared a name, but it felt like we were carved from two entirely different types of wood. Let go of what exactly? I asked, my voice calm as I wiped my hands on an old rag. He gestured around the shop, a sweeping motion with a hand that had never held a tool for more than a photo op. This, all of it. Dad, you've earned your rest. It's time for a new vision, for someone to take Hale and Sons into the 21st century. There was that word again. Vision. To him, vision meant a new website, a flashy marketing budget, and probably finding a way to outsource the actual labor to somewhere cheaper. He didn't understand that my vision was right here, in the air, in the feel of the wood. My vision was the trust I had with families who'd been commissioning pieces from me for 3 generations. The rocking horse I was working on? It was for the granddaughter of my very first client. That's not a business metric you can track on a spreadsheet. My vision is doing just fine, Ethan, I said, walking over to the large workbench that had been my father's before it was mine. We have a 6-month waiting list, and our reputation is flawless. What part of that needs fixing? He took a step closer, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the stray wood shavings. We're leaving money on the table. We could be licensing our designs, creating a more affordable line, expanding. You're thinking like a craftsman, Dad. I'm thinking like a CEO. Uh-oh. Something in his tone set my teeth on edge. It was the condescension, the casual dismissal of my entire life's work as some quaint little hobby. I am a craftsman, I said, my voice harder now. That's what this name, our name, is built on. It's not a brand, Ethan, it's a promise. When someone buys a Hale piece, they're buying my time, my skill, my integrity. They're buying a piece of me. You can't mass-produce that. His face tightened, the charming facade cracking. With that attitude, you'll run this company into the ground. You're an anchor holding it back. The disrespect was so blatant it felt like a slap. This wasn't about the company's future. It was about his impatience. He saw this place not as a legacy to be stewarded, but as a bank account he couldn't wait to withdraw from. A cold, hard certainty settled in my gut. I looked him straight in the eye. This company will go to you when I'm gone, Ethan, not a day before. And until then, you'd do well to remember that you're not the CEO. You're just a son who has yet to earn his place. Maybe you should try picking up a tool and building something instead of just trying to cash it in. The silence that followed was heavy and thick with unspoken things. He stared at me, his jaw clenched, and for a fleeting second, I didn't see my son. I saw a stranger, a cold and calculating stranger with my last name. Then, without another word, he turned on his heel and strode out of the shop, the sound of his car engine roaring to life a moment later, a violent tear in the fabric of the quiet afternoon. I was left alone, with only the soft hum of the dehumidifier and the lingering, bitter scent of his ambition. The roar of Ethan's BMW faded down the street, and the silence he left behind was louder than his shouting had been. It pressed in on me from all sides, a physical weight in the dusty air. For a long time I just stood there, my hand resting on the cool cast-iron top of the workbench my own father had used. The metal was smooth, worn down by 3 generations of Hales, and in that moment it felt like the only thing holding me steady. The sun dipped lower, and long, golden shafts of light cut through the workshop's high windows, illuminating the dancing dust motes and turning the space into something sacred. It wasn't just wood and steel. It was a cathedral of my own making. A place Ethan had just desecrated with his talk of licensing deals and exit strategies. I took a slow walk around the shop, my footsteps echoing in the quiet. Every machine, every tool hanging in its proper place on the pegboard walls told a story. I remembered buying that big cabinet saw back in '88, using nearly every penny Eleanor and I had saved. I'd felt sick with fear and giddy with excitement all at once. I had just quit my steady job managing a soulless furniture factory, a place where everything was particle board and plastic veneer. I told Eleanor I wanted to build things that would last, things with a soul. She never once doubted me. She just smiled, poured me another cup of coffee, and said, "Well, let's get to work, Arthur." Her faith was the foundation everything else was built on. Back then, the shop was just a one-car garage behind our first little house. The roof leaked, and in the winter, I'd have to run a little space heater for an hour just to get my fingers to work. I can still remember the day I finished my first paid commission, a simple set of maple bookcases. The client paid me $600. I held the cash in my hand, and it felt like $1,000,000. It was proof that I could take something from the earth, shape it with my own two hands, and create a life from it. I ran inside and gave the money to Eleanor, and she framed the first $20 bill. It's still hanging in the office, right next to the feature that Southern Living magazine did on us 10 years ago. Now, I stood in the middle of a 5,000 square foot facility with a climate control system to keep the wood perfectly cured and a roster of 6 master craftsmen who I'd trained myself. We'd built kitchens that looked like they belonged in castles, libraries that were works of art, and heirloom furniture destined to be passed down for 100 years. I'd built all of this, not for the money but for the meaning. I built it for the pride of the Hale name, and I built it for him, for Ethan. That was the thought that twisted the knife. Everything I saw, every success, every award, was supposed to be his one day. I'd imagined him working alongside me, learning the feel of the wood, the personality of each species, the stubbornness of oak, the forgiveness of pine, the rich depth of walnut. I wanted him to learn that you can't rush quality, that a thing is only worth what you put into it. But he'd never been interested. He went off to business school and came back speaking a language I didn't understand, a language of leveraging assets and maximizing shareholder value. He looked at this place, this living, breathing extension of my soul, and all he saw was an underperforming asset. An anchor, he'd called it. My God. The sheer ignorance of that stung worse than the insult. I walked back over to the cherry rocking horse, its smooth, curved lines catching the last of the evening light. I ran my hand over the head, feeling the subtle contours I'd spent all afternoon perfecting. This little horse would see a child through its first years, maybe even that child's own children someday. It had permanence. It had a purpose beyond its price tag. Ethan's vision was for things that were fleeting apps, that were forgotten in a year, investments that vanished overnight. He didn't want to build a legacy. He wanted to cash one in. A profound sadness washed over me, deeper than the anger I'd felt earlier. It was the quiet grief of a dream dying. The dream that my son would be the one to carry on my life's work. As darkness finally settled outside, I flicked on the overhead work lamps. Their bright, honest light chased the shadows away. I picked up a piece of fine grit sandpaper and went back to work on the rocking horse. If Ethan wouldn't appreciate what I'd built, I still did. The work was still good, the wood was still true. And for tonight, that would have to be enough. My hands moved on autopilot, the fine grit sandpaper whispering over the cherry wood, back and forth, following the contours of the rocking horse's flank. It's a meditative process, one I've lost myself in 1,000 times. As you work a piece of wood, its history reveals itself, the tight rings of a hard winter, the wider gaps of a summer with plenty of rain. But tonight, it wasn't the tree's history I was seeing. It was my own. A memory surfaced, so clear and sharp it felt like it was happening right now, a ghost emerging from the grain of the wood itself. It was the day of Ethan's graduation from Duke, 15 years ago. The backyard was full of people, the air smelled of Eleanor's famous barbecue, and I was practically bursting with pride. My son, the first Hale to get a master's degree, holding a diploma that I couldn't even read but knew had cost a fortune. I'd bought him a car as a graduation present, a brand new, dark green sedan. It was more car than I'd ever owned in my life, and seeing him standing beside it, smiling for pictures with his friends, felt like the culmination of everything I'd ever worked for. Later that evening, after most of the guests had gone home, Eleanor and I were sitting on the porch swing, watching the last of the fireflies blink in the twilight. I was still riding high, replaying the day in my mind. "He's going to do great things, Elle, I can feel it," I said, squeezing her hand. She was quiet for a moment, just watching the darkness gather under the old oak tree in our yard. Then she said, her voice soft, but with a note of caution that pricked my balloon of pride, "He has a fine mind, Arthur, but I worry we've made his path too smooth." I looked over at her. In the dim light, I could see the concern etched around her eyes. "What do you mean?" I asked, a little defensively. "We worked so he wouldn't have to struggle like we did. Isn't that the point?" "There's a difference between struggling and striving," she answered, turning to look at me directly. Her gaze was always so steady, so clear. "This afternoon, I heard him talking with his friends. He was already talking about trading in the car you bought him for a sportier model next year. He didn't say thank you, Arthur. He said it was a good start." She paused, letting the words sink in. "An oak tree needs strong winds to grow deep roots. If you shelter a sapling from every storm, it grows tall and weak, and it's the first to fall when a real gale comes." I remember feeling a flash of annoyance. I pulled my hand away and stood up from the swing. "You're being too hard on him, Eleanor. The boy just graduated. Let him enjoy it. He's earned it." "Has he?" she asked. Her voice still quiet, but the question hung in the humid night air between us. "Or have you earned it for him?" I didn't have an answer for her then. I mumbled something about her worrying too much and went inside, ending the conversation. I was blinded by my love for him, by my own pride. I wanted to give my son the world, and I didn't stop to think if he'd ever learn to value it, if it was just handed to him. I had provided the soil, the water, and the sun, but I'd built a wall around him to block out the wind. The memory faded, leaving me standing alone in the silent workshop, the piece of sandpaper limp in my hand. My God, Eleanor had seen it. All those years ago, she had seen the rot starting to form at the core. She had seen the entitlement taking root, and I hadn't listened. I had defended him, I had enabled him, and I had continued to smooth his path at every turn. Every time one of his brilliant startup ideas failed, I was the one who quietly paid off the debts. Every time he needed a down payment for a bigger house or a fancier car, I was the one who wrote the check. I thought I was being a supportive father. But looking back now, in the harsh, honest light of my workshop, I saw the truth. I wasn't helping him. I was crippling him. I was the one who had kept the wind at bay, and now, the man he had become, he was the storm. Eleanor was right. I hadn't raised an oak. I'd raised a tall, weak sapling, and now he was trying to tear down the whole forest for the sunlight. The weight of that realization was heavier than any slab of timber in the shop. The work was no longer a comfort. I set down my tools, the unfinished rocking horse seeming to mock me with its innocence, and felt the cold, hard ache of a regret that was 45 years in the making. The next 3 days passed in a heavy, gray fog. The argument with Ethan had followed me home from the workshop, seeping into the floorboards of the house Eleanor and I had shared for 40 years. I couldn't bring myself to go back to the shop. The scent of cherry wood and cedar, usually a comfort, now only reminded me of the confrontation. My tools sat idle. The rocking horse remained unfinished. Instead, I puttered around the house, fixing a loose cabinet hinge, oiling a squeaky door, doing mindless tasks to keep my hands busy and my thoughts at bay. But the memory of Eleanor's warning, of her prophetic words on that summer evening, was a constant, low hum in the back of my mind. The silence from Ethan was absolute. No angry texts, no follow-up emails, nothing. And in that void, my own regret grew, twisting into a painful knot in my chest. I had failed him. I had failed Eleanor. On the third evening, I was sitting in my worn leather armchair, a book open on my lap that I hadn't read a page of in over an hour. The house was quiet, filled with the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall. It was the same clock that had marked the time on my argument with Ethan, its steady rhythm a constant reminder of the minutes and hours that were passing, stretching the distance between my son and me. Suddenly, the old rotary phone on the side table, the same one we'd had for 30 years, began to ring. Its shrill, insistent jangle ripped through the quiet house, startling me. My first instinct was to ignore it. Business calls came to my cell now. A call on this line was almost always personal, and I felt I didn't have the strength for a conversation. It rang a second time, a third, a fourth. Each ring seemed to echo the emptiness in the house. With a heavy sigh, I leaned over and picked up the heavy black receiver. Hello? Dad? It's me. The voice was instantly recognizable, but the tone was all wrong. It wasn't the sharp, arrogant voice from the workshop. This was a different Ethan, quieter, subdued. I straightened up in my chair, my heart giving a strange, uncertain thump. I said nothing, waiting. Listen, he started, and I could hear him take a breath on the other end. I wanted to apologize. For the other day. I was completely out of line, disrespectful. The words came out slowly, carefully, as if he'd rehearsed them. I've been thinking about what you said, about earning my place. You were right. I came in there sounding like some slick MBA kid with all the answers, not like your son. And I'm sorry. I was so stunned I couldn't speak for a moment. An apology was the last thing on earth I had expected. My mind raced, suspicion warring with a sudden, desperate surge of hope. Was this real, or was it just another tactic, another angle? But the regret that had been my constant companion for 3 days was a powerful current, pulling me toward forgiveness. Maybe I hadn't failed him completely. Maybe Eleanor's strong moral foundation was still in there somewhere, buried beneath all that ambition. Well, I finally managed, my voice a bit hoarse. You said some things that were hard to hear. I know, he said quickly, and I hate that I'm the one who said them. It's just, things have been stressful lately, and I handled it all wrong. I made it your problem, and that wasn't fair. It sounded so reasonable, so mature. It was the version of my son I had always hoped to see. The knot of regret in my chest loosened its grip, just a little. We all say things we don't mean when we're under pressure, I offered, the words of reconciliation coming to my lips before I could even stop them. Then his tone shifted again, becoming warmer, brighter. Hey, I know this is out of the blue, but the Tar Heels are playing state on Saturday. A night game. I was thinking, maybe we could go? You know, for old time's sake. Get some hot dogs, yell at the refs. Forget all this business stuff for a few hours. The invitation hit me like a physical blow, winding me with nostalgia. Football games at Keenan Stadium had been our thing. I could still picture him as a little boy, drowning in a Carolina blue sweatshirt, his face sticky with cotton candy, his eyes wide with wonder at the size of the crowd. Those Saturdays were some of my most treasured memories. He was offering me a bridge back to that time, back to a simpler, happier relationship. How could I say no to that? How could I refuse a chance to believe that the man I'd raised, the boy Eleanor had loved so dearly, was still in there? You're serious? I asked, a real smile spreading across my face for the first time in days. The weight on my shoulders felt like it was lifting. Dead serious, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice now, too. I'll get the tickets, the best ones I can find. My treat. Let's just be a father and a son again. What do you say? The last of my suspicion melted away, washed out by a flood of relief and paternal love. I say that's the best idea I've heard in a long, long time, son. After we hung up, I sat in the armchair, the heavy receiver still warm in my hand. The ticking of the grandfather clock no longer sounded lonely. It sounded hopeful, like it was counting down the seconds to a new beginning. I had my son back. He had just needed to find his way, and maybe my harsh words had been the catalyst he needed. Eleanor had always said to have patience. Maybe, just maybe, she was right again. The 2 days leading up to the game felt like a sunrise after a long, bitter night. The heavy blanket of gloom that had settled over my house lifted completely. On Saturday morning, for the first time since the fight, I went back to the workshop not out of obligation, but with a lightness in my step I hadn't felt in years. I threw open the big bay doors, letting the crisp, clean autumn air chase out the stale silence. The scent of cedar and sawdust smelled like opportunity again, not like a mausoleum for a dying dream. I even found myself humming an old tune as I put the finishing touches on the cherry rocking horse, sanding its surface until it felt like polished silk. Every motion felt purposeful again, filled with the simple joy of creation. I called my foreman, a good man named Dave who had been with me for 20 years. Dave, I said, my voice full of energy, my son and I are heading to the game tonight. We've turned a corner. It feels good. I could hear the smile in his voice when he replied, "That's the best news I've heard all year, Arthur. You deserve it." And I believed him. I did deserve it. We deserved it. Later that afternoon, back at the house, I stood in front of my closet, feeling like a teenager getting ready for a first date. The anticipation was a pleasant, thrumming energy under my skin. What does a man wear to his own reconciliation? I pushed past my work clothes and the formal shirts I rarely wore, searching for something appropriate. My fingers brushed against the sleeve of a faded Carolina blue sweatshirt, the university logo cracked and worn from dozens of games. I pulled it out and held it up. It felt thin and ancient. I was about to put it on when I remembered. Tucked away in a cedar chest at the foot of our bed, beneath old photo albums and Eleanor's wedding dress, was something even better. I knelt and lifted the heavy lid. The scent of cedar and memories washed over me. There it was, lying neatly folded on top of a stack of old letters. The scarf. It was a beautiful, deep Carolina blue with white stripes, hand-knitted from thick, soft wool. Eleanor had made it for me one Christmas about 20 years ago. She'd just taken up knitting, and she'd presented it to me with a shy smile, pointing out all the crooked stitches and dropped loops. "It's not perfect," she'd said, "but it'll be warm." I lifted it out of the chest and ran it through my hands. The wool was still soft, the color still vibrant. It wasn't perfect. It was better than perfect. It was hers. I could almost feel the warmth of her love, of her patient hands, woven into every imperfect stitch. I remembered wearing it to a game a few weeks after she gave it to me, a brutal, windy day in November. She'd bundled up beside me, and when our team scored the winning touchdown in the final seconds, she jumped up and hugged me, her face buried in that very scarf. Holding it now, it felt like a blessing, a tangible link between the happiness of my past with her and the future I was about to build with our son. She would be so happy. The thought was so clear, so certain. This is all she ever wanted for us. I was sure she was smiling down on me right now, her faith in patience and love vindicated. My worries from the past week felt foolish, like a bad dream fading in the morning light. Ethan was a good man. My son was a good man. He'd just lost his way for a bit, and now he was coming home. I finished getting dressed, pulling on a warm flannel shirt and my comfortable walking shoes. The last thing I did was wrap the wool scarf around my neck. It felt warm and protective, a shield against the evening chill. I looked at my reflection in the bedroom mirror. The man looking back at me seemed 10 years younger, the lines of worry around my eyes softened by a genuine, hopeful smile. I wasn't just a craftsman or a business owner. I was a father, about to share a perfect autumn night with his son. I felt nothing but pure, uncomplicated joy. With a final, satisfied nod at my reflection, I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door and stepped out into the crisp, golden twilight, completely unaware that I was the happiest man on his way to his own execution. The energy around Kenan Stadium was electric, a living thing that pulsed with the roar of the crowd and the rhythmic beat of the marching band. The air was cool and smelled of everything good about autumn night's popcorn, roasting peanuts, and the faint, sweet scent of fallen leaves. It was an atmosphere charged with decades of tradition and rivalry, and it swept me up the second I stepped out of my car. I felt a boyish excitement bubble up inside me, the same feeling I'd had bringing a young Ethan to his very first game. I walked toward the old well, our designated meeting spot, my eyes scanning the sea of blue-clad fans. I spotted him leaning against the stone wall looking at his phone. He was dressed casually in a pair of jeans and a university jacket, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't look like a CEO in waiting. He just looked like my son. He saw me and his face broke into a wide, genuine smile that reached his eyes. He pushed off the wall and met me halfway, wrapping me in a hug that was strong and sure. It wasn't the hesitant, awkward embrace we'd sometimes shared over the past few years. This was real. "Dad! You made it," he said, pulling back. His eyes went to the scarf around my neck. "Hey, you wore the scarf. Mom made that, didn't she?" "She did," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Figured it was the right night for it. "It's perfect," he said, and the way he looked at it, with a soft, nostalgic fondness, melted the last tiny shard of ice in my heart. He then pulled 2 tickets from his jacket pocket with a flourish. "You ready for this? I promised you good seats." I looked at the tickets. Section 224, club level. My eyebrows shot up. Seats like these cost a fortune. Before I could protest, he was already steering me toward the entrance. Tonight's not about the cost, Dad. It's about the memory. Let's go make a new one. The seats were incredible. Cushioned chairs, a perfect, unobstructed view of the entire field from the 40-yard line, and our own private concession stand just steps away. We were high above the rowdy student section, in a part of the stadium I'd only ever seen on TV. Ethan, this is too much, I said, looking around in awe. Nonsense, he replied, already flagging down a vendor. 2 hot dogs, 2 Cokes, the usual. He turned back to me, his expression open and sincere. I wanted tonight to be special. A proper apology. I wanted to do it right. And he did. For the next 3 hours, Ethan was the son I had been missing for 15 years. The performance was flawless. He didn't just act interested, he was engaged. He brought up memories I'd half forgotten myself. Hey, remember that game against Wake Forest? When it was so cold the Coke froze in our cups? He asked, as we watched the teams warm up. Later, he pointed to a player on the field. See number 12? His dad played here back in the 82nds. You told me you saw him score the winning touchdown against Duke once. He had remembered. He'd listened to all those stories I'd told him as a kid, and he'd kept them. We talked through the first quarter, not about business or money, but about football, about old family vacations, about his mother. He asked how the rocking horse was coming along, and when I told him it was for the granddaughter of my first client, he nodded thoughtfully and said, "That's a hell of a thing, Dad. Building something that lasts through generations." The words were so full of respect, so validating. They were like a balm on the wound he'd opened in my workshop just days before. As the game intensified, so did our old camaraderie. We were a team again. We stood up and cheered at the same moments, our voices joining the roar of 80,000 fans. We high-fived after a brilliant touchdown pass, his hand meeting mine with a satisfying clap that felt like a promise. At one point, after a huge defensive stop, he threw his arm around my shoulder and gave me a squeeze, shouting, "Did you see that hit?" His touch felt so natural, so easy, that I found myself fighting back tears of sheer, overwhelming gratitude. During halftime, as the lights dimmed for the marching band's performance, he turned to me. The noise of the stadium faded into a dull roar as he looked me in the eye, his expression serious. "You know, Dad," he said, his voice just for me, "you were right. The other day, in the shop, you were right about everything. I've been chasing all the wrong things, looking at spreadsheets and profit margins, and I forgot what actually matters." He gestured vaguely at the field, the crowd, at the 2 of us sitting there. This is what's real. I've missed this more than you know." It was a confession, an admission, an act of contrition so perfectly delivered that it washed away every last doubt. I put my hand on his shoulder. "I've missed it too, son," I whispered. "More than you know." In that moment, sitting beside him under the brilliant stadium lights, with the echoes of the band's music swelling around us, I felt a sense of profound, absolute peace. This was it. This was the turning point. My son had come back to me. Eleanor would have been so happy. Our team won in the final minutes, with a field goal that sent the entire stadium into a frenzy. We were on our feet, hugging, yelling, 2 anonymous fans lost in a sea of shared victory. It was the perfect ending to a perfect night. As the crowd began to slowly pour out of the exits, Ethan put a hand on my arm. "Let's hang back for a minute," he suggested, his voice calm amidst the happy chaos. "Let the worst of the crowds thin out. No need to rush." It sounded so practical, so sensible. I agreed without a second thought, sinking back into my seat, content to savor the feeling of the win and the feeling of having my son back for just a few moments longer. We waited in our seats for another 10 minutes, watching the vast stadium empty out until it felt like our own private kingdom. The roar of 80,000 people had faded, replaced by the quiet hum of the massive overhead lights and the distant chatter of the cleanup crews below. The field, still brilliantly lit, looked like a perfect green carpet, holding the echoes of the victory we had just shared. The intimacy of the moment felt special, as if we were the last 2 people left in a world built just for us. "Tonight meant the world to me, Ethan," I said into the quiet, my voice filled with an emotion I couldn't hide. "Thank you." He turned to me, his face illuminated by the soft glow from the field, and his smile was gentle. "It meant a lot to me too, Dad. We should have done this a long time ago. We won't let it be so long again. The promise was exactly what I needed to hear. It wasn't just an apology for the past. It was a commitment to the future. We finally stood up and made our way down the empty concrete steps, our footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Outside, the night air was even cooler, carrying the scent of victory and distant bonfires. The chaotic flood of fans had become a gentle stream, with small groups laughing and talking as they headed home. We walked together, falling into an easy, comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who are completely at ease with each other. It was the best kind of quiet. When we reached the main promenade at the edge of campus, we stopped under a tall, old-fashioned lamp-post. The path forked here, one way leading toward the bustling downtown streets, the other winding through the quieter, tree-lined university gardens that bordered my neighborhood. "Well, this is me," Ethan said, gesturing with his thumb toward the downtown route. "I'm parked way over on the other side of Franklin Street. It's going to be a nightmare getting out of that lot." He looked over at the peaceful, lamp-lit path that led toward my home, and a thoughtful expression crossed his face. "You know, Dad, it's such a perfect night. Instead of trying to find a cab or getting stuck in all this post-game traffic, why don't you just walk home through the gardens? It's a straight shot from here. Maybe 20 minutes tops. A nice, quiet walk to cap off the night." The suggestion sounded wonderful. The thought of a peaceful stroll under the old oak trees, with the happiness of the evening still warm in my chest, was infinitely more appealing than sitting in the back of a stuffy taxi. I saw it as him being considerate, thinking of what I would enjoy most. "You know, that's a great idea, son. I think I'll do just that." "Good," he said, smiling. "I'd drive you, of course, but honestly, it would probably take me longer to get the car and fight through traffic than it would for you to walk." It all made perfect, logical sense. There was no reason to question it. "Don't you worry about me," I said, patting his arm. "This was perfect. You get home safe." "You too, Dad," he said. And then he pulled me into another hug. This one was different from the one at our greeting. It was longer, deeper. His arms wrapped tightly around my shoulders, and he held on for an extra moment, his grip surprisingly firm. For a split second, it felt less like an embrace, and more like he was steadying himself, or maybe memorizing the moment. I just chalked it up to the emotion of the evening, a son finally letting his guard down with his old man. I squeezed him back, my heart swelling with love. I was so proud of the man he was becoming. When he finally let go, his eyes seemed to be shining under the lamplight. "Just be careful crossing Cameron Avenue by the garden entrance," he said, his voice a little strained. "It can be a little dark there." "I've been walking these streets for 40 years, son. I'll be fine," I chuckled. "I know. Just be careful." He gave me a final nod, then turned and walked away, melting into the remaining crowds heading downtown. I stood there for a moment, watching him go, a happy, contented smile on my face. The soft wool of Eleanor's scarf was warm against my skin. The night was perfect. My son loved me. Everything was going to be all right. I turned and began my walk home, the peaceful, tree-lined path beckoning me, completely unaware that Ethan's final, caring instruction was not a warning, but a confirmation of the designated kill spot. The walk through the university gardens was everything Ethan had promised. It was peaceful, beautiful, and the perfect epilogue to the evening. A canopy of ancient oak trees formed a tunnel over the stone pathway, their leaves rustling gently in the cool night breeze. The distant sounds of city traffic were muted here, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the soft crunch of my own footsteps on fallen leaves. Lampposts, spaced far apart, cast long, deep shadows, creating pools of warm, golden light in the surrounding darkness. I walked slowly, in no hurry at all, replaying the highlights of the game in my mind. The winning field goal, the roar of the crowd, the feeling of Ethan's arm around my shoulder. My heart was full. A quiet, profound gratitude had settled over me. I thought of Eleanor, and for the first time since her passing, it wasn't with a sharp pang of grief, but with a warm, comforting sense of her presence. "You were right, Elle," I thought, looking up through the branches at the sliver of moon in the night sky. Patience. It was all about patience. The reconciliation felt so complete, so real, that the bitter man my son had been in the workshop just a few days ago seemed like a distant memory, a stranger who had temporarily inhabited his body. Tonight, I had my real son back. The path ended, opening up onto Cameron Avenue. Just as Ethan had said, it was quieter here, The edge of the campus, where the old ivy-covered academic buildings stood dark and silent for the weekend. The main road was a wide, two-lane street, and directly in front of me was the crosswalk he'd mentioned. The streetlights here were dimmer, spaced further apart, and the thick trees of the gardens cast the area in a deeper shadow. I remember thinking that Ethan was right to warn me. It was a little darker here. A thoughtful son, looking out for his old man. I reached the curb and stopped, pressing the button for the crosswalk signal. Across the street, the little white walk symbol lit up, its silent invitation glowing in the darkness. I did what I always do, a quick glance to the left, then to the right. The street was completely empty. There were no approaching headlights, no sound of an engine, nothing but the rustle of the leaves and the distant city hum. All was clear. All was safe. I took my first step off the curb, my mind already on the warm glass of whiskey I'd pour myself when I got home to celebrate. In that split second, the world exploded into chaos. A hand, strong as a vice, clamped down on the arm of my jacket, yanking me backward with such shocking, brutal force that I felt a searing pain in my shoulder. I stumbled, my feet tangling, my body lurching off balance. My first thought was that I was being mugged, a violent random attack. "Don't cross, Arthur. It's a setup." A voice roared in my ear, a desperate, terrified shout, just as a monstrous shape materialized out of the darkness. A huge black pickup truck, its headlights off, was barreling down the street at an impossible speed. It wasn't just driving, it was hunting. It roared past the exact spot where my body had been a heartbeat before. The sound was deafening, a guttural, mechanical snarl that ripped the peaceful night to shreds. The wind from its passage was a physical blow, a violent shove that tore at my clothes and whipped Eleanor's scarf across my face. The ground beneath my feet actually vibrated, a deep tremor that shot up through the soles of my shoes. I was hauled back onto the curb, my legs giving out completely. I would have collapsed onto the pavement if the stranger hadn't been holding me up, his grip the only thing keeping me vertical. I gasped for air, my lungs burning, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The truck didn't slow. It took the corner at the end of the street with a tortured squeal of tires and vanished, leaving behind only the acrid smell of burnt rubber and diesel fumes hanging heavy in the cool night air. The silence that crashed down in its wake was even more terrifying. One second I was a happy father walking home. The next I was inches from being turned into a smear on the pavement. My mind struggled to catch up, to make sense of the sudden, violent shift in reality. The beautiful night, the football game, Ethan's smile, it all felt like a dream. This, the smell of diesel, and the frantic pounding of my own heart was the nightmare I had woken up to. "Are you okay? Arthur, are you hurt?" the man asked, his voice shaking. His grip loosened slightly as he helped steady me. I finally turned to look at the man who had just saved my life. He was about Ethan's age, wearing a dark coat, his face pale and etched with horror in the dim glow of the streetlight. My mind, still reeling from shock, struggled to place him, but I knew him. The shape of his face, his glasses. "Leo?" I whispered, my voice a ragged, disbelieving croak. "Leo Vance? Ethan's friend?" He looked at me, and in his eyes, I didn't see the relief of a heroic rescue. I saw guilt, I saw pity, and I saw the terrible, devastating knowledge of the truth. My confusion deepened into a cold, creeping dread. "What's going on?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. How did you know?" Leo didn't answer me right away. He just looked at me with those guilt-ridden eyes, his hand still gripping my arm, a lifeline in a world that had just been torn from its foundations. The smell of diesel fuel was already starting to fade, but I knew I would never forget it. It was the scent of my own death narrowly avoided. Let's sit down," he said, his voice unsteady. He guided me a few steps away from the curb, toward a cold iron park bench, half hidden in the shadows of an old magnolia tree. My legs felt like they were made of sand. I didn't so much walk as I was steered. I collapsed onto the bench more than I sat, my body trembling with a violent, uncontrollable shudder. We sat there for what felt like an eternity, the silence broken only by my own ragged breathing and the distant wail of a siren somewhere across the city. I stared at the empty crosswalk, the harmless white lines painted on the asphalt now looking like a target. I replayed the last few seconds in my head, over and over, the perfect, empty street. My first step, the roar, the violent yank backward. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. Finally, I turned to Leo, who was staring down at his own hands, clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "Leo, for God's sake, talk to me," I pleaded, my voice barely a whisper. "What just happened?" He took a deep, shaky breath, and when he finally looked at me, the shame in his eyes was so profound it made me flinch. He spoke, and his words were quiet, but they hit me with the force of that speeding truck. "It wasn't a random accident, Arthur," he began, his voice cracking. "That truck, the driver, Ethan sent it." The world stopped. The ticking of the grandfather clock, the cheers of the crowd, the whisper of the sandpaper on wood. Every sound from the past week vanished, sucked into a black hole of disbelief. "No," I said, the word coming out as a puff of air. I shook my head, a small, weak motion. "No, that's impossible. That's insane. You're wrong." My mind scrambled for an alternative, for any other explanation. We were at the game. We laughed. We celebrated. It was the best night we've had in years. He wouldn't. "That was the point," Leo interrupted, his voice gaining a hard, sorrowful edge. He was forcing himself to say the words, to make me understand. The whole night, it was all part of it. He called it setting the stage. He needed you happy. He needed you trusting. And he needed you walking home alone. Right here. Right at this time. Every word was a hammer blow, systematically shattering the beautiful memories of the evening. The expensive tickets weren't an apology. They were an investment. The heartfelt talk at halftime wasn't a confession. It was a script. The warm hugs weren't affection. They were the embraces of a Judas. I looked down at my hands, at the soft wool of Eleanor's scarf still wrapped around my neck. It suddenly felt like a prop, a costume piece I'd been given to wear in my son's grotesque, murderous play. A coldness, so deep and absolute it felt like it was freezing me from the inside out, began to spread through my chest. "Why?" I choked out, the single word a testament to my shattered comprehension. "Why would he do this?" "Money," Leo said, the word tasting like poison. "He's in trouble, Arthur, deep trouble. He owes $250,000. He saw the confusion on my face and elaborated. "Not to a bank. To some very serious private lenders, the kind of people who don't care about interest rates. They care about kneecaps. They gave him a deadline. He was desperate." The puzzle pieces, so disparate and confusing a moment ago, began to slam into place, forming a picture of monstrous, unthinkable betrayal. The confrontation in the workshop. His desperation. The sudden, miraculous apology. It was all connected. "He came to me a few weeks ago," Leo continued, his voice heavy with the weight of his confession. "He wanted financial advice. A loan. I told him he was tapped out, that he needed to come to you, to be honest. He just laughed. He said you were the obstacle, not the solution." Leo took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, as if trying to wipe away the image. Then he started talking, hypothetically, about how if you were to have a tragic accident, all his problems would be solved. The company, the estate, he'd inherit everything. He could pay off his debts and live the life he felt he was owed. "He said that?" I asked, my voice numb. "He called me an obstacle?" Leo nodded grimly. I thought he was just venting, saying crazy things out of desperation. I never thought he'd actually do it. Then, this afternoon, he called me. He was cheerful. He told me he'd found a solution, that everything was going to be fine. He told me about the game, about how well it was going, how you'd completely bought his act. The clinical, cruel phrasing "bought his act" sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. He mentioned he'd hired a professional, a guy who stages these things for insurance fraud, for $50,000. It would be a clean hit and run. No witnesses. Just a beloved local businessman, tragically struck down walking home after a perfect night with his son. The story was already written. I felt the world tilt, the park bench seeming to sway beneath me. My son, my boy. The child I had held in my arms, the one I had taught to ride a bike, whose graduation had been the proudest day of my life. He had spent the evening performing a pantomime of love for me, all while a paid killer was getting into position. He had hugged me goodbye, knowing he was sending me off to my death. The final, caring warning, "Be careful." Its dark was the most chilling detail of all. It was his way of confirming the location, of making sure his target was exactly where he needed to be. "So how did you—" My voice trailed off. After he hung up, I couldn't breathe, Leo said, his own voice thick with emotion now. I couldn't live with it. Whatever friendship I had with him, it didn't extend to letting him murder his own father. It just couldn't. I drove over here and I waited. I prayed I was wrong. I prayed he wouldn't come. But then I saw you, walking out of the gardens, looking so happy, and I knew I had to do something. I said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The son I had loved, the one I had been so overjoyed to have back just 30 minutes ago, did not exist. He had never existed. In his place was a stranger, a monster who saw my life as nothing more than an inconvenient line item on a balance sheet. The cold in my chest had become a solid block of ice. It wasn't grief, not yet. It was the terrifying absolute void that comes after your entire world has been revealed as a lie. I sat there on that cold iron bench, a father who had just discovered he was nothing more than an obstacle to his son, and I stared out into the darkness, which was no longer just the absence of light, but the presence of a truth from which I could never, ever walk away. Leo drove me home. I don't remember the drive itself, only the smeared neon colors of the city lights passing by the passenger window like watercolors in the rain. My mind was a silent white void. When we pulled up to my house, he turned off the engine, and we sat in the quiet darkness of the car. "Arthur," he said, his voice hesitant, "are you going to be okay? I can stay. Or I can call someone." I turned my head slowly and looked at him. "There's no one to call," I said, and my own voice sounded alien, a hollow echo coming from a great distance. "Thank you, Leo, for what you did." He just nodded, his face a mask of misery. "Whatever you decide to do," he said, "I'll help. Any way I can." I got out of the car without another word and walked up the stone path to my front door. I didn't look back. The house was just as I'd left it, dark, quiet, and peaceful. But it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the silence of a tomb. I closed the door behind me, and the sound of the latch clicking into place felt unnervingly final. My home, my sanctuary for 40 years, now felt like a stage, the set of a life that had been a lie. Every object seemed to mock me with its shared history. I walked on autopilot into the living room, the room where I had been sitting just a few hours earlier, filled with so much foolish hope. I went to the polished oak cabinet that I had built with my own hands 30 years ago and took out my best bottle of single malt whiskey, a 25-year-old treasure I saved for special occasions. Tonight was supposed to be a special occasion. My hands, surprisingly steady, poured 2 fingers' worth into a heavy crystal glass. The rich, amber liquid caught the dim light from the street. I raised the glass, the scent of peat and smoke filling my senses, and I couldn't drink it. The celebration I'd been anticipating was a funeral. I set the glass down on the mantelpiece, untouched, a monument to my own gullibility. My eyes fell on my reflection in the darkened window. I saw the Carolina blue scarf, Eleanor's scarf, still wrapped around my neck. It felt impossibly heavy, like a collar. Slowly, I unwound it. The soft wool was still warm. I thought of my joy in finding it, of the happy memories it held. Now it was tainted, an accessory to my own planned murder, the primary tool of my son's emotional manipulation. With a strange, detached precision, I folded it neatly, smoothing out the wrinkles, and placed it on the arm of my reading chair. I couldn't bring myself to put it back in the chest. Not yet, but I couldn't bear to look at it either. My gaze drifted to the collection of silver-framed photos on the mantel, a gallery of my life's happiness. There was one of Ethan at age 7, perched on my shoulders at a 4th of July parade, his little face beaming with pure, uncomplicated joy. There was a family portrait, taken when he was in high school, Eleanor, beautiful and vibrant, me with a little less gray in my hair, Ethan standing between us, looking a bit awkward but happy. I picked up that photo. I stared at the smiling face of the boy I had raised, searching his eyes for a flicker of the monster he would become. When did it happen? When did the boy who held my hand so tightly become a man who could hire a stranger to crush the life out of me? The grief, which had been held at bay by the shock, finally hit me. It wasn't a loud, violent thing. It was a silent, crushing weight that buckled my knees. I sank into my armchair, the photograph still in my hand, and the grief washed over me, Grief for the son I thought I had. Grief for the love I had so willingly given. Grief for Eleanor, who had been spared this monstrous truth. A single, hot tear traced a path through the fine layer of workshop dust still on my cheek. And then something shifted. As I sat there in the crushing silence, staring at the smiling lie in the silver frame, the grief began to burn away. Beneath it, there was a core of something harder, colder. It was the part of me that had faced down bankers who told me I'd fail, the part that had worked through freezing winters and brutal summers, the part that had built something real and lasting out of nothing but will and wood. The victim in me was dying, and the builder was waking up. The sadness was still there, an ocean of it, but it was no longer drowning me. It was crystallizing. It was hardening into a new kind of resolve, cold and clear and unbreakable as granite. I looked down at my hands, at the calluses and scars that told the story of my life. These were not the hands of a foolish old man who let himself be betrayed. They were the hands of a maker, a creator, and if they could build, they could also dismantle. My son had made a business decision. He had weighed my life against his debt and found it wanting. He had treated my murder as a financial transaction. Very well. It was time for me to make a business decision of my own. I placed the photograph face down on the table beside me. The longest night of my life was over. The sun would be up in a few hours, and when it rose, it would be the dawn of a new, colder day. And I knew with absolute certainty what I was going to do. Monday morning, I did not go to the workshop. Instead, I put on my best suit, the charcoal gray one I'd worn to board meetings and Eleanor's funeral. It felt like armor. At precisely 9 a.m., I walked into the hushed, wood-paneled conference room of the most respected estate lawyer in Charlotte. Leo Vance was already there, sitting at the long, polished mahogany table. He stood up when I walked in, his expression a mixture of concern and respect. I gave him a firm, reassuring nod and took the seat at the head of the table. I wasn't here as a grieving father seeking counsel. I was here as the founder of a 45-year-old company, here to dictate the terms of its future. The lawyer, a sharp, silver-haired man named Mr. Davenport, entered and offered his condolences for the terrible incident Leo had briefly described to him over the phone. I cut straight to the point. "Thank you, Mr. Davenport," I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "I am not here today to discuss what happened. I am here to act on it. I need to make immediate and permanent changes to my entire estate." I opened the briefcase I'd brought and laid out the existing company charters and my current will. The first step is simple. I want my son, Ethan Hale, completely and irrevocably removed from all succession plans, personal bequests, and corporate interests. When I die, he is to receive nothing. Not a single share, not a single dollar, not a single splinter of wood from the shop floor. Davenport nodded, making a note. A straightforward disinheritance clause. We can make that ironclad. "It's not enough," I said, and both he and Leo looked at me, surprised. "Just cutting him out is a passive act. It leaves a void. I don't want a void. I want to build something in its place. I want the wealth he tried to kill me for," I said the words without flinching, "to be actively used to fund the precise opposite of everything he is." I leaned forward, placing my scarred hands on the polished table. My son sees my life's work, the craft of woodworking, as a relic, an inefficient, outdated business model to be liquidated. He despises the very thing that gave him his privileged life. So, that is where we will begin. I looked from the lawyer to Leo, my vision clear and sharp in my mind. We are going to create a new entity. We will call it the Hale Foundation for Young Artisans. I let the name hang in the air for a moment. Upon my death, the ownership of Hale & Sons Fine Woodworking will be transferred entirely to this foundation. The company will continue to operate, with Dave, my foreman, as its director. But 100% of its profits, in perpetuity, will be used to fund the foundation's mission. "And what is its mission?" Davenport asked, his pen poised, his expression now one of intense focus. "Its mission," I said, "is to find young, passionate, talented men and women who love to build things with their hands but lack the resources to pursue their craft. The foundation will provide full scholarships for trade schools, fund apprenticeships with master craftsmen across the country, and award startup grants for those who want to open their own workshops. We will fund the next generation of builders, finishers, and artisans. We will seek out and reward the very work ethic my son holds in contempt. The beautiful karmic symmetry of it filled the room. The money Ethan wanted to pay off his gambling debts and fund his empty lifestyle would instead build workshops. The inheritance he was willing to kill for would instead put tools into the hands of deserving, hard-working kids who understand that value isn't inherited, it's created. Leo let out a slow breath, looking at me with something akin to awe. "It's brilliant, Arthur," he whispered. "It's not just justice, it's poetry." "Is it legally sound?" I asked Davenport, my gaze unwavering. "It is more than sound, Mr. Hale. It's bulletproof," the lawyer replied, a hint of admiration in his professional tone. "Charitable foundations of this nature, especially those funded by a self-sustaining business, are notoriously difficult, if not impossible, to contest. His claim would have no merit." "Good," I said, a grim satisfaction settling over me. "Draw up the paperwork, all of it. The new will, the foundation charter, the corporate transfer documents. I want it airtight. I want every T crossed, every T dotted. There can be no loopholes. My son has proven he is resourceful in his evil. I will be meticulous in my justice." I stood up and walked to the large window, looking down at the busy Charlotte streets. I was no longer a father mourning a son. I was an architect looking at a blueprint. I had spent my life building things meant to last: cabinets, tables, cradles. Now, I was building my final and most important project. I had taken the ugliest, most painful event of my life, and I was using it as the foundation for something beautiful, something permanent, something that would honor Eleanor's memory and my life's work far more than a spoiled, ungrateful son ever could have. 1 week later, I found myself in a place far removed from the emotional turmoil of my home and workshop. It was a small, quiet notary's office downtown, a room that smelled of old paper, ink, and the dry, impartial scent of the law. The walls were lined with nondescript legal books, and the only decoration was a framed print of the North Carolina state seal. The setting was deliberately mundane, and for that I was grateful. Justice, I was learning, wasn't always a dramatic, thundering affair. Sometimes it was quiet, meticulous, and permanent. I sat at a simple wooden table. Across from me was the notary, a woman in her 60s with a professional, no-nonsense demeanor. To my right sat Leo, his presence a quiet pillar of support. 2 independent witnesses, a retired school teacher and a local hardware store owner, both strangers to me, arranged by Mr. Davenport, sat patiently, ready to perform their civic duty. The notary slid a thick stack of freshly printed documents to the center of the table. The paper was heavy, crisp, and official. I read the titles on the cover pages, and each one felt like a carefully placed stone in the foundation of my new life. The last will and testament of Arthur Hale. The official charter of the Hale Foundation for Young Artisans. The irrevocable corporate asset transfer agreement. This was the blueprint, made real. "Mr. Hale," the notary began, her voice formal, "do you understand the nature of these documents you are about to sign? Do you affirm that you are signing them of your own free will, without duress or undue influence?" I looked at Leo, who gave me a subtle, steadying nod. I thought of Ethan's smiling, treacherous face at the football game. I thought of the roar of the truck in the darkness. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and strong, resonating in the quiet room. "I understand completely, and I have never acted with more clarity or freedom in my entire life." She nodded, satisfied. "Very well. If you would please sign on the indicated line for each document, the witnesses will sign after you." She pushed the first document toward me. The will. I picked up the heavy black fountain pen from the desk. It felt cool and solid in my hand. I found the signature line beneath the clause that explicitly and pointedly left my son, Ethan Thomas Hale, with nothing but a single dollar, a legal formality to prevent any contest. For a moment I paused, the nib of the pen hovering over the paper. This was the final act of severing the bond, the legal death of my role as his provider. I took a breath, not of hesitation but of resolve. Then, with a smooth, steady hand, I signed my name. The ink was dark and final. A line had been drawn. Next came the Foundation's charter. As I signed my name to the document that gave it life, I felt a profound sense of creation, not destruction. I wasn't just erasing a failed legacy. I was writing a new one. I thought of Eleanor, of her belief in building things, in helping others. This, I knew, was a legacy she would have been proud of. This was our legacy. Finally, the asset transfer, the legal mechanism that would bind my life's work to its new true purpose. My signature on this page ensured that the company Ethan saw as a simple cash machine would instead become a perpetual engine of opportunity for others. After I had signed the last page, the notary took the documents. The witnesses, who had watched the proceedings with solemn gravity, added their own signatures. Then came the final, satisfying act. The notary picked up her heavy metal embosser. With a series of crisp, percussive clicks, she pressed the official seal of the state into each of my signatures, leaving a raised, permanent impression on the page. It was done. It was irrevocable. The retired schoolteacher, a woman with kind eyes, looked at me as I gathered my copies. "That's quite a legacy you're creating for those young people, Mr. Hale," she said softly. I looked at her, then at Leo, and felt a sense of profound, somber peace. "A legacy," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "should be built and earned, not just inherited." I placed the documents securely in my briefcase. The weight of the paper felt substantial, real. I shook hands with the notary, the witnesses, and finally, with Leo. There were no smiles, no words of triumph. There was only a shared understanding that a great and terrible wrong had been answered, not with rage, but with purpose. I walked out of that quiet office and into the bright afternoon sun, my shoulders straight, a man who had lost a son but had finally secured his life's meaning. 6 months have passed. The chill of that terrible autumn night has long since given way to the warmth of a North Carolina spring. The world outside is bursting with new life, and here, inside the workshop, something is growing too. The air is still thick with the familiar, comforting scent of cedar and sawdust, but it's no longer a lonely sanctuary. It's a classroom. A future is being built here, carved from wood and determination. I'm standing by the old workbench, the one that belonged to my father. But today, I'm not the one holding the tools. I'm watching a young woman named Maria. She's 22 years old, with eyes that see the story in every piece of wood, and hands that, while still learning, possess a natural, intuitive grace. She is the very first recipient of a scholarship from the Hale Foundation for Young Artisans. I found her in a community college program, her talent shining so brightly it was impossible to ignore, held back only by a lack of funds. Now, she's here. "Don't force it," I say gently, my voice softer than it used to be. "Feel the grain. It'll tell you which way it wants to be cut." She's working on a complex dovetail joint, her brow furrowed in concentration. She nods, takes a slow breath, and adjusts her grip on the chisel. She makes the cut, and this time, the sliver of walnut curls away perfectly. A brilliant, proud smile spreads across her face. "I did it," she whispers, looking up at me, her eyes shining. "Mr. Hale, I still can't believe this is real. No one's ever given me a chance like this before." I place a hand on her shoulder, feeling the same pride I once mistakenly invested in my own son. But this is different. This pride is earned, not just hoped for. "Talent and hard work deserve a chance, Maria," I tell her. "That's the foundation of everything worthwhile. You've earned this." She goes back to her work, her focus absolute, and in that moment I feel a sense of peace so profound it settles deep in my bones. I sometimes wonder what Ethan is doing. I hear whispers now and then, that he's taken a middling sales job, that his life has become smaller, that he still talks about the great inheritance that is coming his way any day now. He is waiting for me to die, completely unaware that, for him, I already have. There is no anger in the thought, only a distant, quiet pity for the empty, hollow man he has become. He no longer has any power over me. His betrayal was the catalyst, but it is not the story. The story is here. It's in the determined set of Maria's shoulders as she learns her craft. It's in the applications from other young, hopeful artisans that now sit on my desk. It's in the future of this workshop, which will now serve not one family's name, but the dreams of many. I walk over to a rack of raw lumber and pick up a piece of cherry wood, the same kind I used for that last rocking horse. I run my thumb over its smooth, cool surface. My son tried to end my story on a dark, lonely road in the middle of the night. He thought my legacy was a pile of money he could inherit, but he was wrong. My legacy is not something you can take, it's something you build. And in the ashes of his betrayal, I have built my finest work. A legacy made not of blood, but of purpose. A legacy of strength. Music swells gently and fades out. If you were moved by Arthur's journey, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss another story. And in the comments below, I'd love to know, what do you think makes a true legacy? Thank you for watching.